is a presentation of Foosball Radio.
If it's too high, too low.
You cannot believe it.
I was a good bar player.
I was very vocal.
Very vocal.
I wanted to win.
This is Todd Lafredo. You're listening to Foosball Radio.
It's FoosTalk Live.
You talking to me?
Compelling and lively banter.
Are you going to talk to us?
Talking foosball.
Foosball was how I measured my value as a man. You took that away.
Players and fans, promoters and pros. Unedited and raw.
Talk.
Living in the moment.
We have a lot of important things to talk about.
All while practicing social distancing.
Cool. We'll talk. No big whoop.
Let's get this thing started. FoosTalk Live. Coming to you live from the Foosball Radio studios, it's another episode of FoosTalk Live. Hey there, I'm Tom Robinson, and I want to personally thank our Patreon pillars for their support of Foosball Radio and FoosTalk Live. Here's to James Sparky Castillo, David Kalla, Jay Teal, Brian Schmid, Cameron Burrows, Mike Green, Jimmy Love, Dwayne Stewart, Judy Schober, Jamie Kunst, Rob Cutler, Reed Rector, Clay Toomey, Adam Gilson, and our friends from the 716 Buffalo Foosball Club. Thank you. Your support brings continued and expanding content from Foosball Radio and FoosTalk Live as we cover the greatest sport on earth. Visit patreon.com/foosballradio to find out how you can become a Foosball Radio patron. Learn about the exclusive benefits we offer you. FoosTalk Live is brought to you by Original Leonhardt. The Leonhardt Tournament Model is the most popular foosball table at the ITSF World Cup. Designed and handcrafted in Germany, order online and have it delivered to your door. Visit www.original-leonhardt-usa.com and use promo code FoosTalk to save 10% off your purchase price. Episode number 143 of FoosTalk Live. Hello there, and welcome once again to Twitch TV in the studios of FoosTalk Live. We're coming to you to bring the last 5 of the top 25 players in the top 25 players in the U.S. Tour. So buckle up. Of course, talking about the great game of foosball, we always got to have the world's best foosball play-by-play announcer, which would be Jim Stevens. Hello, Jim.
Tom, how are you? Hi, everybody. It's good to be back, and of course, we're down to it. The 5th of 5 episodes, bringing you the top 25 singles players in the history of the American Tour. I think a lot of you can probably figure out who's left on that list. The order remains to be seen, and certainly there's going to be some disagreement between those of us who are on that voting board, and maybe you as well, Tom. But looking forward to what should be a great show here tonight.
Well, I think this, regardless of the outcome today, I think we'll all be relatively happy. Not necessarily that it's over, but we'll be happy in the sense that, finally it can be revealed and we can all kind of talk freely about it. And then, of course, we'll have the post-mortem next week. Although I think maybe a post-mortem for Adam Gilson might be in order this evening. It doesn't seem like he's at the top of the old game here. Adam, how you feeling, by the way?
I'm at the bottom of the game here. Post-mortem, by the way, I don't like that either. I think we're going to call it post-top 25 kibbutz.
Say what again?
Kibbutz.
It's
better.
A Yiddish word.
Yeah, it's better than.
It's better than people sit around talking about something.
Oh, that's what that is. Okay, got it. Wow. And by all means, this list would not be complete if it were not for the contribution of our Chicago foosball player, Mark Torres. Hello, Mark.
You guys, Tom, you said that we wouldn't be glad it's over. We're going to be glad. We're going to be glad it's over, Tom. I mean, I love it, man. I wish it could go on forever. The conversations are amazing, really stimulating conversations. We'll be glad when this part's over to get to the next phase of the dialogue.
Yes.
Next phase.
Two things real quick on Mark Torres from me. You introduced him as a Chicago foosball player. I can only consider Mark Torres a San Jose, California foosball player. That's number one. And number two, are you up at the cabin in the woods there without internet, Mark? What's going on? The production quality might be a little down this week.
Again, I'm trying to. There's some technical stuff going on, but I got to fix some stuff, and I'm getting some texts. I want to get some help here, but I got some issues, man. How's that?
Have you tried unplugging it and plugging it back in again?
That's
you know what it is, I think, because you guys are on my phone. And,
I noticed he's got quite an amazing lifeline. Did you see that?
yeah.
Is it better now? Is the audio better?
Yeah, that is a little better. What'd you do?
I put the phone in my hand. Now I'm holding it up like I have like I'm Hercules. I can't do this for 3 hours.
Yes, you can. I believe in you, dude. This is hard-hitting journalism.
All right, Mark, get yourself ready, get yourself prepared, and we'll come back to you here in a few minutes and check on your status here.
Yeah. Wow. So along the way tonight, we may even be joined by Dave Gummis, and we're not sure about that. There's some technical things to iron out there as well. But, despite technical gremlins, we still have to do this because, well, it's important. We have to know who is the top 5. Who are they? And we know maybe who they are, but maybe what order do they come in? I think that's going to be the surprise.
That is going to be maybe a surprise, and maybe it won't be a surprise to some. I know there was some disagreement with the voting board, of which Dave Gummison was the 4th. It was, of course, Adam, myself, Mark, and Dave. So we're hoping he can jump on tonight as well to lend his perspective. But, we're all coming at it from a different angle. And while we do have experience at doing this from last year's top 50 list, it was still challenging. We've talked about it over the weeks. What are we looking for? Length of career, concentration of career, toughness of era, the eye test. And I think tonight, the eye test, at least for me, is going to come into play on all 5 of these individuals.
How often or how many times in a particular show do we actually get a chance to talk about somebody who's internationally acclaimed, who might appear in our list tonight? But that it just seems like whenever we do talk about somebody who's internationally acclaimed, it's usually the same person. Why would that be?
It is, and maybe Adam, you can offer this up too, because you played with you came up with one of the great international players who was maybe the other guy that gets mentioned, but it's true. How many international players really have had a huge impact on the American tour? There's only been a few of them. Adam, I know that you were partners with the great Robert Atha, who still didn't make this list, but really could have. If he had ever won something here in the United States,
Right.
certainly a competitor, certainly a guy that's always in the mix. But Adam, you came up with him. You saw the potential of a guy that maybe should be in the list or on the list at some point.
Yeah, on the list at some point. And we talk about that a lot, right? I mean, we saw the performance at Colorado State. I saw it, of course, from my in the fetal position in front of my toilet, but I was still watching it at home, rooting. But just seeing what happened is getting to the finals at open singles. Rob Atha does, and Rob Atha then does what Rob Atha then does. Great success on the international tables for whatever reason when he is over here. I don't know why, but it happens, right? But yeah, when he and I played together, Mark and I beat him at Vegas in the pro doubles, and then I dumped Mark like a hot potato to pick up Atha because I was like, that guy's good, and I remember him being good. And then I saw him a few years later because I stepped away from foosball after that. I saw him in like 2008. I was like, whoa, he just went to a whole nother level. So it's really fascinating to see that, especially when we're talking about the international impact that players have on this tour and this list.
I have 2 things I want to mention about that. So it's funny when we say the influence, the international influence, it's easy to forget Dieter Thiele and who's the great Italian that who's the guy who came out here? Not Coletta, Bentivoglio, Benti. You got to remember that Frederic played their games. Frederic shot and played with an accuracy and efficiency those guys never reached, but those guys played 2 to the 5, brush pass on the 2-bar. They played of course, a Euro rollover. So that game was easily the game that translated best for Europeans here. Just Fred played it in a way that no one else ever played it. And some of that Fred's it's odd, the circles here. Fred's got to attribute some of it to Sex to Alfredo. So he gets to the European skill set with Alfredo's coaching and support. The thing about Atha, and Atha is a friend. Atha suffers from a lot of things that some foosers suffer from. It's not really after some time. These guys are so skilled and so talented. They could have winning success without 100% commitment to the game. That's really what happens. These guys, even Atha, I hope you're listening, you punk, but when he won the World Cup, Joe Hamilton, who was a rookie or an amateur at the time, bailed him out of that match. So Joe Hamilton played lights out. So remember, man, he like scored and blocked, and so Atha suffers from something that is something that frequently happens with these guys. They treat it like a great hobby or sporting at times, and they kind of float through and they win in spite of themselves every once in a while. That's like Atha's if Atha had the same level of commitment that Tony had, he'd be a great adversary for Tony. But otherwise, he's just a part-time adversary for Tony.
Yeah, and despite that, there's been some great results from him anyway. But finish your thought as well.
No, I was just gonna say, Adam. I told Adam and I won that Pro Doubles of the Hall of Fame Classic, and then Eric Dunn asked me to play the Worlds. I said I don't play foosball. I play with him anyway, and I took second at the Worlds the next tournament after winning with that.
Who'd you lose to?
Not you and Atha. I lost to Eric.
Hey, before this goes too far off the rails, Tom, let's not forget about one other name when it comes to international foosball, and that is the defending world champion on Tornado, Brandon Munoz. So certainly, he also becoming only the second international player to ever win the Tornado World Championships. And you talk about those European players, and you mentioned Dieter Thiele, you mentioned Benti and Carletta and those kinds of guys. These are the guys that Fred learned from. These are the players who had been playing 15 or 20 years, really, even before Fred started. And he took that, like Mark said, and took it to another level. And really the only player besides Brandon Munoz, who is completely an American-style player, although doing it his own way, but the only European player to ever take the European game mixed with a little of Fredo and take it all the way. And I have a feeling we're going to be talking a little more about Fred here tonight as well.
Could
maybe.
It seems like a possibility for sure. But yeah, no, I'm always curious because there's such a player base, such a huge amount of people who do play foosball in general, in the European theater. Why more of them don't? Perhaps maybe it's because of style. Or the just maybe the type of tables they play on.
It's the table. Yeah, it's the table as much as anything. Adam, I'm sure you'd agree that Tornado is maybe the most difficult table to play on in the world, and it's a game that has more idiosyncrasies to it, more depth to it than any other. It really is the premier league of foosball here in the United States on that particular table. And we're seeing now more and more German players in particular, but other European players playing on Tornadoes and getting quite good at it. Thomas Haas and several of those young Germans as well. So we'll look forward to that. And who knows, maybe 5 or 10 years from now when we do these lists once again, we'll have a few of those guys on it as well.
Great point. Looking forward to that 5-10 years out. We'll all still be at this, by the way. Hate to tell you that. Sunday night is not your own. Sorry.
Consistency is key.
We should celebrate. Here's to the future, by the way. What Jim and I like to do right about this time is to reveal our favorite IPA. I know that you've been at this already today, Jim, but that's okay. You can also reveal what.
No, that was my pre-show beer, Tom. This is my show beer, and I ran into this a couple of days ago at my local establishment, and I got a little nostalgic because this beer is brewed in beautiful Huntington Beach, California. Where I lived for 8 years during the 2000s, where Tony sprayed him in. I was living in Huntington Beach when Tony won his first world title back in 03, and certainly spent much of the 2000s with this as the home of Inside Foos. This beer is from the Beechwood Brewery in Huntington Beach, California, the Amalgamator. Here it is, the Amalgamator IPA, 7.1 ABV, 70 on the IBU scale. I think it's going to be good. And certainly nostalgia factoring in.
The name like Amalgamator, it better taste good.
Brings back the memories, the surf, the sand, the gulls. Huntington Beach, tastes great.
A little bit of grit in that one, possibly. Sandy grit. And Adam, what are you doing to suppress your immune system tonight?
Well, actually, tonight I picked something. It's off-brand, but it's a Signature Care sore throat spray with hints of cherry, phenol are the active ingredients, inactive ingredients, water. So that's where I'm at this evening.
And what's the ABV on that? Yeah, what's the alcohol volume on that?
48.
48%. In other words, let's just take a little rubbing alcohol and toss it down. Why not? Whew. Well, cheers to that. And Mark, I will ask you, what are you?
I'm sorry, guys. I was so caught up in technical stuff. I didn't even grab anything, so I have less than Adam.
I'm just gonna enjoy watching you guys drink your beers. Is what's
All
gonna
right.
happen.
All right. Well, I'm going back in time just like Jim. I'm heading back to Chicago, Illinois, and this is the Half Acre Beer Company, and they came out with this great thing called the Daisy Cutter IPA. Daisy Cutter. I love the flowers, man. It makes me think of the future here, spring, and it's this what they call Balmoral hops. I'm not even sure what that is, Balmoral. But
Balmoral, yeah, Scottish
was that
derivation.
what that is?
Derivation, yeah.
I knew you would know. I knew you would know. Well, let's see what this Daisy Cutter does. It's named after, I guess, a weapon, right?
Right. I was gonna say that it's named after a weapon.
Daisy Cutter bombs. Well, let's see. All right, bombs away.
Oh, look at that color! Wow.
Oh yeah, it's kind of like it's almost an amber, but that's a very nice bouquet here of this Daisy Cutter.
Don't miss out on that lactose, baby.
No lactose this week. No lactose. I was tempted. I really did. I was thinking, you know what? That was so good. That was so tasty that we could bring that back. But no, we have to.
You're gonna drink that till they cover you in daisies.
That's exactly right. The Daisy Cutter. There it is. Down the hatch. Cheers, guys.
That was morbid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You know that music is going to haunt you for the rest of your life, Mark. You'll never, ever, ever be able to live that down. You'll be hearing that in your dreams, your nightmares. I hope.
It induces a bladder awakening response because just the sound.
Like the sound of running water.
Yes.
Well, so guys, here's to the final five, 5 through 1 tonight, with the top 25 male singles players on the U.S. tour, which we'll be getting to shortly. I'm anxiously anticipating what this is going to be like. So tonight, as we flash back, well, let's see what happens. Just I won't say another word here. And then there was none. Oh, wait a second. Where did you go? There you are.
Joe DiMaggio.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
You know what? This is Gremlin night. It's technical Gremlin night. That's what it is. All right.
Jim, make up the call. Is Robbie losing to somebody?
And Mares goes down once again here at the World Championships.
That was so rude. I'm such a douchebag. I'm surprised I get invited back to the show.
You know, it's going to be fun when we do the post whatever Adam said thing that we're going to do after this show. It's going to be interesting to talk about guys like Mares. And of course, we're going to talk more about Lafredo. We're going to talk about some of these other individuals. Maybe should have been higher. Maybe should have been lower. Who should have been on the list? Who shouldn't? It should be fascinating. How you doing there, Tom?
I think we got her covered now.
Way to vamp, though, Jim. Way to vamp.
I love that.
Such a pro, man. Such a pro.
He's good.
You guys are the best. All right.
Father of lies.
Take 2. With great moments in foosball history, this is a FoosTalk Live.
Using the left hand, he works it up the table. 2-rod to 5-rod. Pass along the wall, and Frederick Collignon with a chance to put it away. Blocked by Esther Bauer. Comes back to Fred. And there it is. In 4 games, Frederick Collignon defeats Andreas Esterbauer to win the ITSF Men's Singles Championship once again here in Nantes, France.
Listen in next time for another great moment in foosball history. It's FoosTalk Live. Now, if you were an odds maker during the 2012 World Cup, was he like 1-to-1 odds, Fred, for that event?
No, it would have been about 1 to 10 odds, I think, for the most part, because he had basically won every singles championship or every other one. This is 2012, so there had been Ryan Moore had picked one up in there. in between Fred's 5 or 6 that he won internationally. And that was Andreas Esterbauer, the Austrian player he was competing against, who also came over here and played well in America for a while, but a really outstanding European player as well, who did come over and have a little bit of success on the American tour with some top 5, top 10 finishes in open events. But Fred, internationally, multi-table, was nearly unbeatable. The only players who really ever beat Fred were the great Americans. Ryan Moore, of course, had wins over him internationally in singles, but that was pretty much it. Fred didn't lose much in singles internationally, and of course, we're going to go over his record, I have a feeling, here in a little bit as well, here in the United States.
Yeah, I think there was, after that match, there was a brief interview that you conducted, Jim, which I thought was enlightening and fun. But Frederico's young son was with him during that time, and that the youngster, he seemed like he was all fascinated by the lights and the sounds of his dad playing foosball. Of course, probably
He was used to it. Yeah. Fred made his name was Killian. From the time Killian was 2 or 3 years old, whenever Fred would go up on stage to accept his honors, of which he had many, of course, Killian would be there with him. And he made Killian part of the process, both at home, out on tour, and of course, when he won and attended these ceremonies as well. Killian now, what's Killian going to be? He's probably into getting close to college age, I think, at this point.
Right.
A tennis player.
I understand he's heck of a
heck
of a tennis player. I was going to say, yeah.
So we're talking 12 years ago. So yeah, probably 18, 19. That's amazing.
Yeah. But what a pleasure it was to be able to cover Fred. You know what? I was a Laker fan in the 1980s, right? And Mark and I maybe have some basketball talk at some point here. But I was a fan of the Lakers in the 1980s. Showtime, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthy, etc., Michael Cooper. And while that was all going on, every year, every game, I just said, man, I want to appreciate what I'm seeing here, what I'm experiencing. This is special. I may never see something like this again. And I didn't. I mean, the Lakers went on and had some further success, but nothing like those teams of the 80s. And Mark, I know you'd agree. But it was that way with Fred as well. When early in Fred's career, we identified pretty early this guy was different. He was special. And when he finally won in 1998 in doubles, and then in 1999 when he won his first singles championship, and then throughout the early part of this century, I would regularly sort of make sure I understood and I realized and I appreciated what I was experiencing and watching and getting to be a part of and commentate. And then suddenly it was done. It was over. 2012 was the last time he's played in this country. I've had a chance to see him internationally and commentate internationally, which is, of course, a continuation of that treat. But you got to appreciate when you see greatness of a certain kind. And the Lakers of the 80s fit that bill. And of course, so did the great Frederic Collignon.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, please. I was just going to, I wanted to say that I mean, it was amazing. The run of dominance and success was unparalleled. And you get nostalgic and emotionally connected to your memory. It's just difficult to not unlike the Showtime Lakers, which I was a big fan of basketball back then. And when you have a 6'9" point guard playing every position in the NBA Finals, and you're rooting for them to beat Boston, it's not even your team. You are watching something special. There's comparisons now. You hear comparisons with NBA players, but the same with foosball. I don't know if there'll ever be anything like Fred ever again. It's too hard to imagine.
I think it's impossible. I think it literally is impossible for that to happen again. Like that, So, and again, we're going to talk lots about Fred tonight.
Yeah.
Before
guys,
wait, hold on. I gotta throw this in there. Because what you just talked about, Mark, was very interesting to me to hear about the nostalgia and the rose-tinted glasses and whatnot. And I have gotten one of the things that has been happening that I was surprised by from this list this time around was I've gotten probably about a half a dozen messages from people asking me about revisiting players that have not gotten to the Hall of Fame that maybe should, that might not be mainstream picks that should be in. And the same thing for players that should be on these lists that aren't, but that speak very strongly of their credentials. And it's an interesting thing when we talk about what makes somebody good. Why aren't they on these kind of lists? And as we delve into these top five, I mean, it's going to speak for itself. But I think, especially when we do the post-mortem kibitz, we're going to really be talking about that, right? We're going to be really talking about this discourse, this conversation that we're creating here.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And one final point as well. You mentioned, Tom, you've said it a couple times tonight. It's the top 25 male players in history. Don't worry, folks. We're going to do the top 15 or so female players coming up this year as well.
That's gonna be great. I think that's gonna be just as fascinating and, of course, just as surprising as well, but, well, that's for another day. Are you guys ready to dive into this? I mean, the last one, the last 5
Yeah,
here, what?
should we go ahead and review the top 20 so far and kind
Yeah, we
of
should.
Yeah.
in case people haven't seen the previous shows. If you haven't, of course, you can go back and access them and watch them. But let's start with number 25. And of course, the great Oklahoma player Kevin Keeter was inducted into the Hall of Fame a few years ago. And you just mentioned that there are players that need to be revisited and are not in the Hall of Fame. Number 24, and I mentioned this last week, and he was also in our top 50, and that's Ronnie Nevoy, right? He makes our top 25 singles players. He makes our top 50 players, period, and is not in the Hall of Fame and never really gets very strong consideration. Until you stop and think about it, you look at what the man did. I think certainly we have to take a closer look at him in particular. Number 23, a man who we're hoping to hear from tonight, that's Dave Gummison. Number 22, a great singles player out of California in Greg G. Perry. John Smith, a legendary Texas player, came in at number 21. Number 20, Don Swan, one of the few players on the list without a World Singles Championship, but really played the singles format in a way that was so memorable and really pushed the envelope. Number 19, the great Lewis Cartwright, who really stopped playing singles at one point to focus on doubles, or else he probably would have been much higher on this list. Number 18, Rick Martin, out of the Pacific Northwest, legendary player, one of the great singles players of the 70s. Number 17, Johnny Lott. Say what you will about Johnny Lott, but the man was a great player, certainly on the TS Tour into the early 80s as well. Mike Bowers at number 16, one of the true pioneers of the sport, created the modern way of playing foosball and singles foosball in particular, right there with him. And these two guys, it's almost a tie on the list. Steve Simon out of the state of Texas, another one of the great early players, a pioneer certainly in the game as well. Number 14, and this is a man we're going to talk about in our postmortem kibitz for sure, Robert Mares. Because when you think about it, Robbie didn't win a World Singles Championship, but was in 6 or 7 finals and really was an incredible, and still remains an incredible singles player. The man that I feel very strongly should have been much higher on this list, coming in at number 13, Todd Lafredo. We'll talk more about that in the kibitz. Number 12, Doug Furry. Maybe a little low for Doug here as well. One of the 2 or 3 best singles players of the 70s. Tom Spear, legendary status. I think he's at this position, number 11, as much for what an icon he is, and the eye test as well. Number 10, a great fighter out of Texas, Steve Murray. Number 9, Tommy Atkinson. It's singles player extraordinaire. Number 8, Tony Bacon. And again, this is a guy, when I looked closer at his record in singles, certainly merits this kind of position. Number 7, Dan Kaiser, the only man to win 2 world championships on TS in the 70s. Number 6, the great Terry Moore out of Southern California, a man that a model of consistency in an incredibly successful 15 or 18-year career. And that brings us down to the top 5.
Wow. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but I'm wearing my Johnny Horton shirt tonight, just for the occasion. We don't know where he's going to fall in the list, but we will find out. Guys, before we step into this, anybody else have anything to say?
I want to say that I got into a great conversation about Dan Kaiser. Great conversation about Dan Kaiser. Someone who played up and close against him in finals matches. And this person had no idea how much he wanted. He watched our show, and he wanted to vet the record for himself. And he looked at Dan Kaiser's record. He had no idea how much Dan Kaiser won. I guess Dan Kaiser won a bunch of stuff we didn't mention. He won all kinds of stuff, all kinds of singles events. And we got into a really crazy conversation about what it means, and can it ever be duplicated, and the modern athlete versus the contemporaries, and all this stuff. And it was a really intriguing conversation. Where it ended up with? It ended up with no resolution. It ended up with kind of a banter that was disagreeable, because that's what these conversations do. But it ended up with Dan Kaiser is as much anomaly in his own way as that Fred is. There are 2 types of anomalies, because this person will tell you there's nothing impressive about Dan Kaiser's game. Nothing impressive about Dan Kaiser's game except for his level of play either stays the same or goes up in clutch moments. Nothing fast, nothing lateral or nothing exciting. It wouldn't blow you away. Pull shot was nothing incredible about any facet of his game, except for when the pressure was on, he could either maintain or even slightly increase his level of play. And that's it. And that was enough.
Yeah.
That's enough to be a champion. Anyway, that was my
a champion. That's it. A winner. And again, two world singles championships and a super singles championship in the 1970s, along with all those other titles you mentioned that most of which, or many of which, we brought up last week. But no doubt, Dan Kaiser. It's great that he is at number 7 because he retired playing now 41 years ago, and yet still there's enough there that merits a top 7 finish on our list.
I have nothing to say. The prosecution rests.
Well, in that case, I think we should make our final case. What do you say?
Oh,
Yeah, okay. It was a well-hung jury, no doubt about it.
Thank goodness this is
This show is horrible. This show is gross.
hung jury. What?
Oh, we're going places. Look out.
They were good at their job.
5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Throughout the history of professional foosball competition, the top players have waged war. Many have tried, and many have failed. Last year, we presented the top 50 foosball players in the history of the game. Now, FoosTalk Live returns to bring you the names of those who stand above the rest. The top 25 singles foosball players on the U.S. Tour. This list has been compiled by experts, stored for weeks in the Mark Torres Enchilada Pantry, locked in the vault of the firm Stevens, Torres, Gilson, and Gummison, and delivered under armed guard to the studios of FoosTalk Live. Tonight, FoosTalk Live proudly presents the top 25 male singles foosball players on the U.S. Tour, ranked from number 5 through number 1. Here now is the number 5 ranked male singles foosball player on the U.S. Tour.
You know, the reason why I'm so successful this weekend is not because I put in hard work, I practice hard, I wanted to come here and just dust everybody. It's actually none of that. The reason why I tripled this weekend is because I'm in the best position my entire life. I've got a wife that is incredibly supportive, and I got 2 perfect kids.
Ryan Moore.
Ryan Moore, and what's neat about this final 5, I mean, these are 5 house names, no question about it. What's kind of odd is that 3 of the 5 players remaining are not in the Table Soccer Hall of Fame, only because they're too young, and that's it. And Ryan being one of those. In fact, he is the youngest player on this entire top 25 list. He was the youngest player on the top 50 list in his early 30s. But what a career he has had. With Ryan Moore, you always wonder if he was motivated. And when he is motivated, maybe he has played the game at the highest level we've ever seen. And that includes its singles. He's an incredible, incredible talent from both the forward and goalie positions. The eye test, and we're going to be talking about that with every one of these players, because really you can say what you want about their records and about their influence and their impact on the sport. But it's when you watch them. If you know foosball, you watch these guys and you go, wow, this is remarkable. This is Magic Johnson. This is Fred. This is what I'm seeing. With Ryan, it suggests a player who is incredibly athletic, but also so creative and so strategic that he raises the bar. I mean, literally every time he plays. That, and he and Tony kind of went back and forth for a good solid decade. And it really pushed each other. Underrated, really, as a strategic player. Very, very smart player. Had a breakthrough win back in 2010 at the World Championships when he beat Billy Pappas in the open singles final. Also won open singles on Tornado at the World Championships in 2014 and 2021. So a 3-time Tornado open singles world champion, 2010, 2014, 2021. And who's going to forget that 2021 performance that he was talking about there in that clip from when he was on the show here, when he tripled at the Tornado World Championships. Has more than 15 major titles on the U.S. Tour. And again, I think his A game, talk about these 5 players and their A games. his A game is as good as anyone's. It's just a matter of motivation. Mark mentioned it earlier. If these players had the motivation of in the work ethic of Tony Spratum, where would these kinds of players be? If he played goalie on a regular basis, we've talked about that. He'd probably be the best goalie in the world. In fact, really, he is the best goalie in the world. He won the world championship on both Tornado playing goalie with Blake Robertson and then the multi-table world championship as well. And of course, being a good goalie is so beneficial in singles. Many of the players that on this list have not been shooters from goalie. Many of them, several of them, and several of these top guys are passers, 2 to the 5. But with Ryan, it's all about shooting. And when he can shoot like that, why wouldn't you? Just a remarkable talent on every rod, tremendous table smarts, unparalleled goalie skills, really no weaknesses on the table, except maybe at times motivation, right? He'll be a first ballot Hall of Famer when he's eligible. The youngest player on our list, coming in at number 5, the great Ryan Moore.
Yeah, if this list included international play, it might be rearranged a little bit differently, and Ryan would probably be higher on the list. And we started off this conversation talking about Rob Atha and how defocus maybe attention to more recreational aspects of a foosball tournament, because a foosball tournament, and I mean this by being just hanging out and not being focused on foosball and looking to have a great time with your friends, as opposed to a sporting competitive event. And we know that when Tony comes to foosball tournaments, 99% of the time, it is a sporting competitive event. It's not always like that for Ryan, and it shows. There are people on this list that could be in different places. If the attention to detail and the dedication, the work ethic, and the commitment was there for foosball, and it is not anything insulting when these guys choose to have a more recreational attachment to the game, and they win anyway. And Ryan's greatness from, wow, what an amazing thing to be a really good, strong, amazing power and lateral speed and all that, and then have Bobby Diaz playing goalie for you, which really doesn't have a ton of that. And when you get someone like that who's just a smart positional player that understands movement and understands being clever, and Ryan gets to feed off that and absorb that and understand that and then learn that, it just makes him he made him an incredible foosball talent. And he one of the things that Ryan will get knocked for, and people will wonder, how's Ryan 5 on the list? A lot of people will wonder why Ryan isn't higher, and it will go back to Ryan and Tony pushed each other to like incredible levels of foosball, and it was just the two of them really. And Tony has absolutely the upper hand on Ryan in those head-to-head matchups. Ryan got his there, here and there, but when push came to shove, it brought the best out of Tony. Tony probably owes a lot of that, of course, to himself, but some of that to Ryan for getting him to the next level. So Ryan's going to be on that list of guys that could have been number 1, could have been number 2, could have been number 3, but what really wasn't his commitment to be that in foosball.
Well said, Mark. Well said, Jim. There's a lot to say about Ryan Moore, and I'm not going to touch on his accolades as much as I'm going to touch on something that I think is kind of a more meta issue that we've been talking about when it comes to foosball and deciding who's the best and this and that and the other thing, especially from era to era. So I'm going to invite you all to do a little thought experiment with me as we go down this list, this 1 through 5, and also think about it 10 through 6. But take Ryan Moore's game. Everybody that's watching this has seen it, maybe even played against it. Take Ryan Moore's game when his gas factor is at its highest and drop him in any decade before and tell me he's not a big fish in a little pond. And then reverse engineer that and think about the players from the 70s onwards and put them in the now. Yes, the competition's not as deep as it was then, but I would say that the competition is definitely much more skilled with ability, with the caveat that some things are being missed. Some things, and I've been seeing this a lot in this last year that I've been watching, some people don't know how to block a pull kick. Some people don't have a good zone in singles against a good T-bar. That's what's lost, right? And that's what makes Ryan Moore so freaking good, is that he can do all of that. So again, as we go through this list, I invite you to think about that. Put them in different eras. And there's one person in there that I think is an interesting unicorn, which we'll get to eventually. But number 5, Ryan Moore, very well deserved.
Yeah, Tom mentioned, or I guess Mark mentioned about Ryan. If we brought in his international exploits and brought them into this conversation, maybe we'd have him higher on the list. Ryan, I remember 2009 in Holland, in the Netherlands. He finished his second on the Tech Ball at the Tech Ball World Championships to Fred, and really put on a show. First time he'd ever played on the table, ever. And he finished his second in open singles. I went to Poland, yes, Poland, for the Roberto Sport World Championships in 2012. And Ryan Moore tripled there and won singles, doubles, and mixed doubles on the Roberto Sport table. He's won a singles multi-table world championship. He's won a doubles multi-table world championship. He's been huge for Team USA internationally as well. I once saw him competing at the Bonzini World Championships, a very tough table to play on, yet still performed great. Still got a top 10 finish before he lost to, of all people, Farid Lunas, the president of the ITSF, who totally dominated him, by the way. But it's because Farid that's the only table Farid played on. He could catch everything on that table. Ryan had a good pull shot, good 5-row, pretty good 2-rod as well on that table. But it's the in between stuff that he didn't have. But Ryan, just a tremendous player, and a player you kind of say, I wish that we could see that gas factor, as Adam put it. Always there, because when we saw it in 2021 at the World Championships, what a great pleasure it was to see Ryan return with that sort of motivation, and it resulted in a triple. Only the third player ever to triple.
Before you move on to the next one, because we're in our final five, and I think these are great conversations in regard to this thought experiment. Although it is true, now we've already established that some of these guys like Tom Spear and even Tony, of his own volition, will tell you he's not the fastest. He's not the most talented guy. He doesn't have the best skill. Tony will tell you that he can't do these things that Tony and that Ryan and Billy do. He'll flat out tell you. He beats them anyway. In regard to this thought experiment, you could take Ryan Moore and drop him into the 1970s, but you will drop him into a pool of sharks where everybody is as dedicated, committed, and hardworking as Tony. You will drop him into like 15 or 20 dudes that are working. They're like, you'll drop him next to Dan Kaiser and Johnny Lott. You'll drop them against the guys that don't have the speed, the skill, the fortitude, but they'll have the courage and they'll have the work ethic. And so you got to take Ryan's skill and drop him off back there with Tony's attitude, or he still gets beat. That's my opinion on that. Anyway.
Yeah, drop LeBron James back into the 60s and 70s, right? I mean, and again, the NBA players these days, to kind of use the basketball as an analogy once again, the NBA players now are more skilled than they ever were. But there are things missing from their games as well, as Adam pointed out, things that get missed and overlooked, or shortcuts are taken, or they only play a year of college instead of spending 4 years with a great coach, right? And we do see that with a lot of the modern players, that there are things missing. Despite the extraordinary skill levels.
Or look at Luka Doncic. Okay, there's 450 people in the NBA. About 400 of them are faster, jump higher, are stronger, and more athletic than Luka Doncic. And these 400 guys, they will never get a 50-point game, and they'll never get a triple-double. And then you get a guy like Luka, whose head game and mental composure and professional basketball IQ is through the roof. And he dominates these guys, even though he's missing all that ability. It's in between the ears, man. It's so irrelevant, especially in this top five. Anyway, it's funny. We could get caught up in number 5 and talk until midnight. We might want
to. That's a great comparison with Doncic, though. Really, really great comparison for sure.
Thank you.
Wow.
On we go to our next.
Coming in at number 4 on the FoosTalk Live Top 25 Male Singles Foosball Players.
After I won the world title in singles on tournament soccer in 1981, defeating Bob Maloney from Denver, Colorado with a far wall series. I think he had the best push shot anybody ever shot. You could argue Martin Taylor. You could make an argument, but I played all those guys, and Bob Maloney did a far wall 5 that was just deadly.
Johnny Horton.
It's good to hear Mr. Horton's voice there, talking about Bob Maloney and great push shooters for sure. And that's a guy, Bob Maloney, great singles player as well, great player. Was on our top 50. I think he was around number 40. Johnny Horton, traveled around a little bit, played out of different places, but Johnny Horton will always be from Florida. And one of the great players out of that Florida system. One of the most polarizing and controversial players ever, and also one of the most talented. Again, the eye test tells you that this guy is special, pushing the singles format forward with his quick hitting, kind of arrogant style of play, right? Where he would talk to the crowd, he'd work the crowd, he'd work the officials, he'd work me up in the booth. I don't know how many times I tell you I wanted to come out of that booth, and
You kiss him right on the mouth, Jim.
Yeah, it kissed him right on the mouth. But he was a was a showman, no doubt a showman. But he incorporated it into his game, and when you watched him play, he did everything well on the table. He did it with confidence. And, had some issues, no question about it, with better off the table decision making. He could have been even higher on this list. Here it is, folks. This is why Johnny Horton is in the top 5. He is the only player to have won world singles titles on both tournament soccer and tornado. How about that?
Yeah, crazy.
Think about that. Of all the great players on the TS Tour, and many of them, of course, retired after the crash of '81, all the great players, the longtime players who played on tournament soccer, there's only one guy who won on the tournament of the tour of the 70s. He won in 1981, as you heard him say, and then on tornado in 1990 and in 2001 as well. And in 2001, he was only 19 years old. He won the open singles title at the very last World Championship on the tournament soccer tour. Would have won on Dynamo as well, then becoming the only player to ever win on tournament soccer, Dynamo, and tornado as far as singles goes. But he lost in 1985 to Tony Bacon in the final after he had already won open doubles and open mixed doubles, was looking to triple. Tony said no, because Tony had lost to him in those two finals in 1985. He had some really good years during the 1990s. Had several singles titles, won 5 major titles on the tornado table in the early to mid 1990s, and then of course also spent a few years during that decade on the suspended list for his various off the table and on the table infractions. He did return to the Pro Tour in 2001 to win the World Singles Championship. We all remember the silver shirt and saw him sprinting across the arena and jumping up on the table, surrounded literally by 100 players who mobbed him to congratulate him. He would finish with those 3 world singles titles and a reputation as the most entertaining player in the history of foosball. I think when we did that top 5, he came out on top and deservingly so. While really kind of probably underachieving as a player. Yet he still made it to number 12 on our list of the 50 greatest players on the American Tour, and he's number 4 here. The electric, magnetic, sometimes prophetic, and self-proclaimed greatest of all time. Nice. A man who did it his way and did it extremely well. The one, the only, Johnny Horton, coming in at number 4.
Oh man, so I think the unfortunate thing I want to absorb now, so I don't regret it later, is my mind just starts gravitating toward the cynical thing. Like what I just did with Ryan was talk about why he's not number 1. And I think that's what happens when we're getting to these 5. We talk about why aren't they number 1? We're talking about complete foosball players. With the exception of maybe one of these guys. We'll get to that guy. But when we talk about a complete foosball player, that guy had a dead bar. He could set up a dead man and shoot 10 dead bar long pull shots fast and hard in a row. I watched him do it, just like warming up. Boom, 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 10 in a row. His tic tac. The only person I know that had worked more hours on their 5 bar with that kind of is Tony. There's Tony and Johnny. Johnny was at home because of troubles. Couldn't leave his house, and he must have put 25,000 hours just on this tic tac as near wall tic tac 5-man. And that 5 bar series, I don't want to make claims to who was the pioneer of it, but that is a Florida 5 bar series. It is you see iterations with Tom Yor right now. That's the 5 bar series. All those guys did that series back then. Johnny Horton is an enigma. I had some high-end business conversations regarding foosball for the past 2 years. And what foosball is missing and what people are looking for is to be entertained by foosball. And so Johnny, not only did he have all the moxie, all the charisma, all the skill, and he brought it in the end with his championship play, he had the entertainment value that it just can't be ignored. I've said it over and over and over. That guy could be on any table in the room and there was a crowd. Didn't matter. People didn't even know if he was playing pickup games. There was just a crowd around that dude because he either loved him or hated him, but everybody was watching. Like 70% hated him, 30% loved him. Everybody's watching, and that was his shtick. And whatever, man. I just think he's a superstar. Super talent, and only low on this list, only lower, not any higher on this list, because he made decisions that prevented him from being higher on this list, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jim. So, in keeping with this thought experiment of decades and big sharks, big fish, little ponds, big ponds, when Johnny Horton won his first title in singles, I was a few months old. When he won his second one, I was about 10 years old, and when he won his third one, I was just a little over 20 years old. We're talking decade to decade. Maybe not dominance in everything else that he was doing, but the fact was the spark, the flash was still there, and he was creating these moments where he was winning and winning against very good people, right? We use the term unicorn a lot, and I think it applies to every single person in this top five for different reasons. And to do that on different tables across that many decades puts him there at number 4 easily in my mind. Mark, you touched on it. Personal life, things like that. I'm a huge proponent of just talking to people, just doing whatever we can to just be supportive of people. That's a whole nother conversation. But I had to talk to Mike Green, Horton's partner, when they won 85 Open doubles. I asked him, give me something to say about Horton. And one of the things that Green said that's really stuck out to me was regarding Horton was he never thought anyone could beat him, period. And that's how he played the game. And that might be hyperbole for like a lot of people, but damn it, if it wasn't pretty obvious, that was what Horton thought. Johnny Horton, number 4.
Jim, I think we lost your audio.
I'm going to go ahead and turn my mute off, and then, I want to take you back as well. I want to go back, and I want to create a foosball ballroom. Let's use the Hyatt Regency in Dallas Fort Worth Airport, huge ballroom where you could fit 200 tables. Okay, and I want all those tables to be filled by players from the great players from the 70s, the 80s, and 90s, 2000s, 10s, 20s, etc. Okay, one ballroom. All players in the history of the sport, all the greats, Lafredo and Spear and Spredeman and Moore and Furry and Wiswell. I want them all in there playing. They're all there in this huge ballroom at the same time. Johnny Horton is over on table 86. Where are most of the fans?
Yeah, they're at 86. I promise you,
they're at table 86. Yeah. Over every player in the history of the sport. If they're all in that ballroom at the same time, that huge Hyatt hotel in Dallas Fort Worth Airport, he's on table 86, and there is a crowd surrounding that table. And that's Johnny Horton. And in the history of the sport, there has never been a greater showman. There's never been a more magnetic player for good and bad. It could be a train crash, but you could also witness greatness. You could witness humor. Nobody has ever been more attractive to watch than Johnny Horton, as much and as frustrated as he could get you at times with his behavior. One of a kind, and certainly deserving here at number 4.
Mark, anything you want to add?
Just that thought experiment, just you saying that before you got to Johnny. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about this. In another universe, foosball in a multiverse, foosball doesn't crash, and everyone keeps playing, and they have their progeny, and these guys become coaches, and they are developing players, and there's millions of dollars. And then you get a room like that, and what you actually get is you get the iterations of all those players, and you don't know who's going to win, because that's how foosball got hurt. Later, like in the modern era, there's 3 or 4 guys there. You know who's going to be in the finals. Ryan, Billy, if he's playing, and Tony. You knew it was going to be Ryan and Tony at the end every time, and it was. But in this thought experiment, it's not Ryan and Tony necessarily in the finals. They have to get through Dan Kaiser's incarnation, and they got to get through Doug Furry, whoever Doug Furry created, and they got to get the monster Spear created. They got to get through all these guys that all bring something special. So I don't know. It's an amazing idea to, it's not that simple. You drop Ryan back there, or you drop everyone here, and you have monsters that are committed to the game, like Tony's committed to the game, and you have a ton of them. I don't know. It's really fun to think about.
Adam?
Yeah. No, I mean, okay, you know what? We'll get into it. So one of Horton's points that we talked about, he talked about in those tapes that we have, was he was saying that a lot of the reasons why we attribute a lot of the 70s players, them walking away because of the crash, which is true. But Horton does make the point that a lot of them continue to try, but were getting just dusted by people like Horton and the next generation of players, and they could not compete. because the table that they were used to on the tournament soccer table did not have the finesse as the dynamo, and then of course the tornado as that evolves, right? And it's an interesting conversation to have. Maybe now is not the time to do it, but I think that when we do the post-mortem kibitz, we really should talk about this because it is a huge thing to say.
But you know what that looks like, though, man. Think about what this looks like. Those 70 players are in their early 20s. And Todd and Spear and these guys are like 17, 18 years old. So these guys in their early 20s, when TS crashes, they got to get jobs, man.
Right.
And these guys are still playing in the garage. They're playing Dynamo in the garage. And these guys are like, I'm 23 years old. What am I going to do? So that whole thing plays a layer of dimension here that can't be discounted.
Yeah, and to put one more layer on that as well, in the 1980s, these players, these tournament soccer players are coming off the emotional devastation of the tour crashing, of them losing their livelihood. And also not playing for big money anymore. So how motivated you're going to get, and how are you going to recover from what was absolutely devastating for so many of these players? But interesting to talk about, and definitely in the kibitz, we're going to continue to expand on that.
Every time I hear the term kibitz, I think it's like wrapped in a plastic bag inside the bird.
Inside the bird.
You got to take those out before you roast it, buddy. You got to take them out.
Oh, giblets, Tom. You goose, you.
Sorry.
God.
That's my overall impression. But anyway.
Hey, this is great stuff, guys. Two players in. We've had great conversation, and we got 3 more to go.
We're two players in? Oh, my gosh.
Plenty of good conversation still to come.
Here we go.
Now, for the player coming in at number 3 on the FoosTalk Live Top 25 Male Singles Foosball Players on the U.S. Tour.
Who did you play with? Who did you play with this weekend? I played with Tommy Atkinson. It was a lot of fun. How'd y'all do? We took 3rd. We didn't seem to play great at the same time. I struggled. I struggled the whole time almost. I played a couple good matches. A couple great matches I played, we lost. So, what happened with singles? Singles, Tony just beat me, and I am waiting. They're pretty far back. Ryan's playing Tracy right now.
Is that still going on?
Yeah, they're way back.
Right. Billy Pappas.
Billy Pappas. This is an interesting one, guys. It really is. The eye test, this guy would be number 1 or number 2. We've talked about his incredible skill level, his athleticism. He was incredibly strong. When you hear a Billy Pappas shot from across the room, you know it. And then you watch him play, and everything just seems so effortless for him, right? Broke through with a rookie singles win at the 1995 U.S. Open in Cleveland, Ohio. I was there. He was 9 years old, lost his first match against players 2 and 3 and 4 times his age. Came back, won 15 or 16 matches in a row to win that title with about 300 plus players in the event. Wow. But then it took a little while. We watched him. He stayed on tour for a couple of years and then sort of went away to do other things for a while. And then began to come back with a new haircut, a new hair color in the early 2000s. And here's Billy back. We always looked at him. Is he going to be a great player? A lot of times these young players we see never, they get to a certain point and move on to other things. And we thought maybe that was the case with Billy. But then there he is, coming back in 2001 out on tour, playing in super doubles and having an impact. And we're saying, well, maybe we have something here. His first big open win was the 2004 Texas State Championships when he and Tony, in 2004, he and Tony played together. What a team it was. And we talked about it at the time, how special these two individuals were. He was second to Fred at the Hall of Fame Classic that year, and then second to Tony at the 04 Nationals up in Minnesota. I remember that match, that finals match. It was young Tony. These guys were both 19 years old, both born within months of each other in 1985. But they're playing in the finals up in Minnesota, 2 19-year-olds, and Billy is just ripping shots from goal, 2 and 3 a game. And this was the first time that we ever really saw Billy doing that in 04 up in Minnesota. And I literally was at the edge of my seat every time he got the ball in that 2-rod. Tony ended up winning that match. Tony at the time, of course, the defending world champion, was a little bit ahead at that point. Finished that year in 2005. He finished 5th at the World Championships in open singles. And so now we're saying, here comes Billy. This young kid we saw at 9 years old and then took some years off. He's in it. He's into it. And Billy was into it. This was when Billy was so focused. He was working on his game, moving up the ladder. a 4-time open singles champion at the World Championships. He also tripled at the 05 Nationals in Chicago, Illinois, when he got Trevor Park his first win, and tripled and he and Trevor did not lose a match in that. Now here's a 7-year run for Billy Pappas that I think probably confirms his top 3 status, because really the numbers are not there for Billy Pappas. The number of wins, the number of major championships are not there compared to some of these other players. However, in 2005, he wins the World Championship, winning open singles, beating Fred in the finals in 05. Fred won championship singles that weekend. There was an open singles and a championship singles, but Billy beats Fred in the final in 05. And now we're saying, wow, this may be the best player in the world along with Fred. In fact, at that time, that's kind of what we were thinking when we watched the level of play that Billy was putting on the table. Then the next year, in 2006, he beats Rob Morris in the finals of open singles. In 2007, the next year, he finishes second to Fred in open singles at the World Championships. In 08, finishes fifth, one of his lower finishes during this run. Right back at it in 09, beats Fred in the finals to win the World Championships. In 2010, finished second at the World Championships, losing to Ryan Moore, who won his first title, and then comes back the next year to again beat Frederic Collignon in the final to win the World Championships. Four World Championships in 7 years, also 2 finals appearances, 2 second place finishes in there as well. 6 finals in 7 years at the Tornado World Championships in an era that saw Frederic Collignon, Tony Sprayman, the early years of Ryan Moore, Todd Lafredo, Robert Mares. Incredibly tough, deep fields. Really, with Billy, a window of his success that really spanned only about 2004 to 2011. Really, only about 8 years in this country was Billy at the top of his game, but did enough to get to this point. He would go on and spend most of the 2010s competing in Europe, had some issues with the American tour, and chose to play internationally. I got a chance to commentate a lot of his matches over there. He wins a Garlando World Championship, Bonzini World Championship, the Players for Players on the Lehmacher table. He wins a world championship. When we're talking about the greatest multi-table world champion players of all time, I have him at number 2. When we do that list, I have Fred number 1. I have Billy number 2 as far as multiple multi-table players. Also an incredible performer for Team USA, the national team, undefeated ever. He's never lost a match in elimination play for Team USA, most of which was in singles. When you have a guy like that, you're going to use him in the singles part of it. Made a great return back in 2019. We all remember when he had 3 second-place finishes at the Colorado State Championship in Denver. Maybe the most talented player the sport has ever seen. Certainly a first-ballot Hall of Famer when he does become eligible at the age of 40. Number 10 on our top 25 all-time. Number 3 here in singles, Billy Pappas. Again, the eye test sells it.
Yeah, I'll just so never has a player. You got guys like Michael Phelps, and they studied Michael Phelps' body for swimming. He's the perfect swimming human being he's like built for it. And then you get the perfect golf swing. Tiger Woods' golf swing has been called perfect. You look at his golf swing, what he can do, things he knows. And then Billy, and I have these problems with where does talent and hard work, where do those things intersect? And because he's been playing since he was a child, right? I mean, he won a rookie event when he was 9. He's been playing forever. But what he was able to do, something happens to a child when they pick up these fundamental skills early. And then something like there's like a quantum thing, that consciousness, these things have become unconscious. He could hit the ball with more lateral speed and more power than anybody in the history of foosball. He has more lateral speed and more power combined. Some guys might be able to hit the ball. Todd says Billy's hit the ball. I'm talking about with just a wrist shot. Billy is the hardest. Todd will tell you he hits the ball harder than Todd does. And there was a time when Todd was that guy. But the combination of lateral speed and power, there's never been anything like that in foosball. And that carried him so far. And when you look at the 7 years, that was basically the 7 years he focused. For 7 years he focused. That's what he did. 7 years of complete destruction. And when he won, the reason why he gets such these high accolades is when he won his 4 titles, everybody was like, Ryan was not quite at his peak. So let's give Ryan was still young. But he had already won a world championship. But these other guys like Fred and Tony and these other guys were still vibrant and youthful and committed to championship play. So Billy won during a very tough time in the most recent era. Is like the 90s, and then there was that period when all these guys were playing together. So and then I'll go back to just briefly. Billy, not unlike Rob, not unlike Ryan. If the money was there in foosball, and if they could make a really good living at doing it, these things would look really. They'd probably look really different. But these guys did other things, and it shows. And those are the only reasons why. It wasn't more difficult. And it was difficult anyway. It would probably have been more difficult if all these guys were still committed to playing foosball at that level during that time. So anyway, go ahead, Adam.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jim. Jim, when did you say that Billy tripled? Was it at 2005 Nationals or 2004?
Was it Colorado or National? It was Nationals? Okay. It was Nationals.
I had him in Nationals.
It was 2005. 2005 Nationals in Chicago. Yeah.
Oh, it's funny. So I was going to share, because I knew we were going to talk about his resume. I knew we were going to talk about his physicality. One of my favorite memories, because Billy and I were kind of buddies for a while there, back when I was playing a lot. And one of my favorite memories at that tournament, because I don't remember that tournament. I don't remember who won. I don't even remember how I did. All I remember was a lot of the evenings, and especially the last night, it would be me and Billy and Moya sitting in the atrium or the hotel venue, watching on the laptop episodes of Aqua Teen Hunger Force, this silly cartoon from that time frame. That was it. I don't remember anything else from that time frame. Just like being just chill and hanging out with Billy and Moya, and it's just so fascinating to me, these memories, these things, these huge moments that happen in players in their careers, and then you pair them with the human side, just sitting there watching TV shows on a laptop and who knows what. It's just so silly. One thing about Billy is if you've ever shaken his hand or shook his hand, it's like shaking hands with a catcher's mitt. It's just this huge hand, and it's this funny thing, because I've talked to Trevor Park about this, who has played with him, with Billy. Trevor says that he starts his rollover like from here, and Billy starts his from like there, and there's a huge advantage to having such huge hands like that. Obviously, there's talent, there's ability, there's blah blah blah, but the physicality, as Mark you were saying, is a huge part of that, right? Finally, we talk about this, the gas factor thing. I'm going to bookend that a little bit here, but it's going to come up again later. I believe that term was coined by Clay regarding Ryan Moore, right? Or was it Billy? Or either one, right? I mean, we talk about that. Yeah. We talk about that, though, right? I know on the outside looking in, I stopped giving what does the SH stand for? Shorts. I stopped caring back in 2005, and I never really tried, pushed myself. I've always wondered. And it's easy for me to look at these players like Billy and Ryan and be like, well, what if you really just dedicated yourself? What if you were making six figures a year just playing, right? I don't know. It would be so fascinating, right? But I think my point is that as fans, and especially as we get to the next two, how fortunate we are as fans in this world right now, in this technology that we exist in foosball, that we can not only watch what they might continue to do, but because of Inside Foos, watch what they had done. Billy Pappas, number 3.
Yeah, it's a man who has fewer major championships than Todd Lafredo, than Robert Mares, fewer major championships than Terry Moore, Johnny Horton, but a man that I think all of us agree deserves to be in this position. And again, the eye test, when you watch him play, it's spectacular. It's amazing. Those 4 world championships. And as Mark said, one of the toughest singles periods in the history of foosball. Obviously the golden era, the second golden era, but that period, late 2000s, right? When you had these 4 players who are in this top 5, and one right there as well. And even Horton was around in the early part of that as well, maybe just before. But certainly the other 4 in the top 5 were all there competing. And it was Billy with a couple of wins over Fred, with a couple of wins over everyone at that time. And despite the fact that he has fewer major championships than many of the players in this top 10, still no question in our minds that he is sitting here at number 3.
I want to add to this because I think it goes back to, think about this carefully. If you're Ryan Moore and Billy Pappas and Tony Spreedman and Frederic, and you want to win the 2002 Open Singles World Championship, you got to go home and you got to study those 3 guys. You got to think about what they did to you last time. You got to think about your history of play. You got to watch inside Foos tape. You got to think about what new wrinkles you're hearing about. You got to prepare for those three guys. You keep going further and further back. And I've heard this from a TS master talking about they would take dudes apart, like these TS masters back when it was big money. They would take each other apart. They all had their notebooks and they would like figure out that thing and grasp onto it and hook onto it and beat you down. And you'll hear a great story about Talafredo winning the 77 Open Doubles World Championship with a hesitation wall pass, and they had never seen it before. And these guys got in their groups and said, we're not going to let this guy get this pass on us again. And guess what? They took that pass away from Talafredo, and it was very difficult for him to win. It just gets exponentially more challenging. And so we missed that. I'm harkening back to we missed that part when Tony and Ryan just had to prepare for each other for a period of time because these other guys dropped off. It's something that was missing from the game, having more dimensions of competition.
I don't think Adam has anything else he wants to say at this stage.
No, he's just blowing his nose, trying to stay coherent.
You're doing great, buddy. You're doing great. Thanks for showing up tonight. We appreciate it.
So bad, man.
My gas factor is high.
We're down to the final two, Tom.
Yes, we are.
Down to the final two. Now we know who those final two are. I think everybody who knows foosball knows who the final two are, and they are definitely the two greatest singles.
We didn't agree, and we didn't agree, by the way. But it's fine the way it ended up. It's fine.
We did not. Not everyone. This was not a unanimous choice at all, and we're going to debate that a little bit, I think. And I think everybody is prepared for this. Let's see how it goes.
The tension builds as we present to you the player who's ranked number 2 on the FoosTalk Live Top 25 Male Singles Foosball Players.
So when you know you're coming to a multi-table event, how do you prepare? What do you do at home to prepare, knowing you're going to come in and play on 5 different tables?
Oh, I asked the coach to come over and play some matches with the team. We play with the Belgium team. They come over 2-3 times, and he organized a tournament to on Leonard to make easy for us.
All right, here's the question everybody wants to know the answer to. If you're playing against you, how do you beat you?
That's a question. I don't know. I would beat me.
Federico Colignon.
Oh, isn't that so Fred? I mean, he is this soft-spoken little man, and he is so smooth and such a genuinely kind guy off the table.
Yeah,
but an absolute killer on the table. All right. This guy, he would lull you to sleep and then he would cut your throat. Is what it would be. We have him at number 2. Three of the 4 of us had him at number 2. One of us had him at number 1. And certainly we can't debate either way would have been fine. I promise you. When Fred first came over, this is a guy, we talked earlier about how he had learned from those great players, from Benti and from Tila and from Carletta and the great European players. And then he comes over here, I think in 2005, right? And begins to play the lower divisions. And we kind of saw him and went, oh, this guy's different. It's interesting. And then 06, he gets a little better. In 07, even better. In 08, he's a world champion. In 09, a singles world champion. But he was a sponge of he would take things, he would learn things. Obviously, Todd Lafredo, starting when they first paired up in 1998, he began to take from Todd as well. Take that European style, combine it with the greatest American player ever, and then produce what became the greatest foosball player period in the history of the world. Number 1 on our list, a 7-time Tornado World Champion in open singles. He won in 99, he won in 2000, 02, 04, 05, 07, and final year in 2012. And again, a very tough era. We talked about all the players, who were winning world championships during that time in terms of Spredeman, Pappas, and Moore, and him. He did have, early on in his career, we first saw him at the Hall of Fame Classic in Las Vegas. First time he came to a non-world championships was in 1998. He and Ismail Saban finished second in open doubles. And Fred also, performed well, the top 5, top 8 finishes in the other events as well. But it was Las Vegas. And Fred ended up having a really tough time in Las Vegas. Early in his career, starting in 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, he could not win singles. He lost to Terry Moore in a final. Adrian Zamora beat him in a final in one of the great performances. But but finally did win it in 04. And then he won it in 05, 07, 08, and 11. Won 5 Hall of Fame Classic. And the Hall of Fame Classic at that time, Tom, was truly almost on par with the World Championships in terms of quality of competition. He changed the game, the way he played, right? He took a European style, incorporated this hybrid American style into it. Really, at the forefront of the 2 to the 5, we had seen the 2 to the 5, but never like this. We had seen the ability to walk the ball on a pin shot, but not like this. Dieter Thiele was a great pin shooter, but Fred was at another level. Tony then and other players then took what Fred did with the pin shot and created the walking snake. He changed the game as much as anyone ever has. 14 major singles championships for Frédéric Collignon. 2002 national championships, right? The only non-Hall of Fame or non-World Championship that Fred shows up. He comes to Atlanta, Georgia, and he triples at the Nationals and wins Masters singles at the Nationals. Again, 14 major singles championships, and that's a lot. That's going to be top 5 all time on the American Tour, despite playing basically 2 events a year for the most part for those 15 years that he was on the tour. Say what you will about the way this came out at the end. Who's 2, who's 1? It could have been either way. There's an argument on both sides for both players. Fred, of course, was number 1 on the top 50 greatest players of all time, unanimously. Number 2 here after a vote. Frédéric Collignon from Belgium, inducted into the Hall of Fame back in 2014, and truly a man who was an artist on the table, and we'll never see anything else like him as a player or as a singles player.
I asked 3 people in this top 5 who was the fastest and I asked of them who was the fastest of them, and 3 of them hands down, unsolicited of each other. They don't know, this is anonymous. Everyone picked Fred. If you had to pick someone to make 1 pass and 1 shot for you to save your life, you'd pick Fred. As a matter of fact, if you had to pick someone to make a block for you, you'd probably pick Fred. I don't know if you'd pick Fred to clear the ball. Maybe you'd pick Fred to clear the ball. Maybe you'd pick someone else to clear the ball. Maybe that's the one place, maybe, where you don't pick Fred. And maybe you still pick Fred, because you know what? Fred is a machine from goalie. We've seen him play goalie. He's bananas. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you can say about Fred. He's the greatest Fooser of all time, hands down. And I guess when this list is discussed, he, on the one hand, some of these conversations go like this about Fred. If you ask how Fred would have done on the U.S. Tour if he played it regularly, one of the arguments is, well, we didn't get to see him. We only got to see him a couple times a year. That's why he did so well. We only got to see him a couple times a year. Oh, that's kind of a backdoor way out of it, right? I mean, it's like, seriously, you guys, the inverse is true too. He didn't get to see you. You think Fred would have been weaker against you if he saw you? Because Fred has a computer memory. Fred remembered my match with him when he destroyed me in open singles years ago. He remembers everything. So I think that, for my opinion, if Fred, and that's why it's very difficult between this 1 and 2. If Fred played more on the U.S. Tour, in my opinion, he just wins more. He's just more dominant. He's just better. That's where. But anyway, I don't have much more. I talk about Fred all the time, probably way too much. Everyone does. It's just like this freak of nature that came through our sport and is now moved out of it. So now we got all this memory of him, and it's going to turn into mythology. And it's just this crazy thing. Thank God we have Inside Foos video to archive and show you the truth. But Fred is he's our number 2 and easily, arguably, our number 1. Adam?
Wow, a lot of controversy there, Mark. That's going to be a fun time for our kibitz. Two things about Fred, because we've talked a lot about Fred, obviously. Two things about him. So I want to go back to my thought experiment, and there's a fly in the ointment for my thought experiment for 2 and 1. If you put Fred back in the 70s and the 80s, does he win with that style of play? Can he do that with that style of play? With the 2 to the 5 is effective? Yeah, Tony Bacon did it in the 80s, predominantly in the 70s. Was anybody doing that? Was going to work on those kind of tables that have less finesse? I don't know. I think that's a conversation to be having. I don't know how much it changes where he is on this list, but I think that conversation keeps coming up, and it's going to be continuing to come up. So it's always good to contextualize this. But my next point is, and I'm going to defer to you, Jim, and you, Mark, because I want to hear your opinion on this. Both of you say that Fred did what he did on the U.S. tour on Tornado, which was arguably his worst table. Could you speak to that, Jim, and then Mark?
Yeah, it's more a testament to the greatness on the other tables where he was almost unbeatable. There were periods of time, years that went by where he didn't lose tournaments, didn't lose matches on the European tour on the various tables over there. And I went to the Bonzini World several times, and I never saw him lose a match for a couple of years in a row. And he played 6-7 events. And if someone beat him in a game, if a French player, most of the players there at the Bonzini Worlds were French. If they beat him in a game, the French national anthem would break out. And if you've that's the French national anthem, by the way, folks.
Wow.
Sort of. But these players would celebrate one win if they beat him in a game, and then he'd win the match. But they'd be ecstatic. I beat him in a game. He was so great on these other tables, on every other table. Tornado, he had competition. The only players who rarely ever gave him stiff competition, especially in singles, were the American players. And that's I think a result of them growing up and playing in the Premier League, which I think the Tornado Tour was certainly then the major leagues of foosball. And so for me, it isn't that he was terrible on the table. Obviously, he was incredibly great on the Tornado table, but he was even better on the others.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So first of all, you look at Ryan and Billy and Tony and Fred, and they all have something very similar in common. They're all second generation foosers that started at a very young age playing the game, and they learned how to play the game right. They learned practice regiments. They learned they didn't spin. They learned all the fundamentals from a parent who played the sport at a high level, and then they grew up in tournament play. Those things are incredibly, you get osmosis and absorption and all this stuff. You're seeing foosball, the hand-eye coordination just elevates. We know that as a child, you learn things faster as a child. So these guys had a huge leap to begin with. But to your exact question about him being more dominant on other tables, there was I have made a friend in the UK, and he showed me, he didn't show me, let me take it back. He told me about a list that described Fred's, it's an actual electronically generated list that described Fred's tournament championship play. And it was like some obscene, and I don't want to exaggerate it. I'd rather get the actual, I'd rather Facebook message him and get the exact detail. But it was some obscene thing where he didn't lose games to players ever. He never lost a game to people for years, never, playing master players that never won a game against him. And so it's really absurd. If you wrote a script about any competitive sport where someone celebrated when they scored a point on you, it'd be stupid, right? But this is what we're talking about. We're talking a guy that was so flippin' dominating that people celebrated when they had any kind of success. It was people would celebrate when they executed a pass. Oh my God, I got a pass through on Fred. They didn't score the ball. It's I got the ball through his 5-bar defense. Fred was so flippin' fast, he just race every pass you have. It's like playing against a video game. It's really stupid. I don't know. You can't even go much further than talk about how ridiculous his speed was.
And that's why I asked, because I really want to contextualize how good he was at singles. I know he's number 2. That's a conversation, whatever. But when you talk about where he was on other tables and what he could do, and they were playing national anthems every time he got beat a game or somebody went ahead, it really speaks to what he was doing on this tour for the time. What was it? 12 years? Active for 12?
About
14?
15, yeah.
About 15?
Yeah. 15 at the highest level, 98 through 2012, although he had played a few years previous to that as well.
But he wasn't. But he was only coming. He was only coming over a couple times a year, right?
Once or twice. One time he came 3 times. I think one time maybe he came 3 times.
2002.
He wasn't. He wasn't on the tour otherwise. That's amazing.
Right. Wow. No, and I was looking back to a lot of table talks from the early 2000s and mid 2000s, and I used to do all pro teams every year, and Fred was always unanimously an all pro, despite only playing 2 of the major championships during the course of the year. One of the things we're going to run into here as we move forward, and Mark, I know it's something you've spoken to in the past, it's the what ifs, right? What if the tour doesn't crash, and what happens in the 80s? What if Fred is still playing during the 2010s? And I think we're going to run into that here as we move now to number 1.
So this is it.
This is the final one. I have a
Big
feeling
mystery.
I have an idea who this might be, but anyway, I digress.
Now, it's the moment you've been waiting for. The FoosTalk Live Top 25 Male Singles Foosball Players on the U.S. Tour. We proudly present to you the number one player on the tour.
I mean, me growing up as a 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old kid, I had to deal with guys like Nathan Winter, Dave Gummison, Johnny Horton, Scotty Weidman, Steve Mose, and there's a lot of like pros like Mike Vandenbosch, Phil Guti, and Dave Knudsen. Just really, really solid scene, and having to deal with Horton and Weidman back then, and even Tommy Atkinson was spending some time in Iowa back then. It was tough, and even some of our local Wisconsin players, like it made my skin thick.
Tony Sprademan.
Oh, that's a great clip, Tom. Great job on that. Tony Sprademan. I've got Tony out of both Wisconsin and Florida. Obviously, came up in Wisconsin, won his first world championship while living in Wisconsin, and a second as well, I think, and then moved to Florida, where he has become such a solid part of that scene. We talk about the Tornado World Championships being the major leagues, being the premier league of foosball. And I think over the years, you can make a very strong case that it has been the strongest. And Tony Sprademan is the only man to ever win 8 Tornado World Championships in open singles. In 03, you all remember that performance. He finished second in 02, losing to Fred in the finals. In 03, he beats Lewis Cartwright in the final. Lewis, great singles player, of course. In 2008, he beats Frederic Collignon in the final in a match at the time that I think I called the greatest performance I'd ever seen. I think it was, and I think it's still certainly right up there. He then reels off 5 in a row, starting in 13, or he wins in 13, and then runs off 5 in a row, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Most of those against Ryan Moore. In fact, I think all of them, barring one, when Lafredo reached the final, was against Ryan Moore. He also won that 2004 National Singles Championship when we really started to see Tony after winning Worlds in 03 and 04. He wins Nationals, and we're thinking, this guy is going to be one of the greatest ever. Won more than 25 major championships in singles, probably closer to 30 or 35, and more overall titles, just state and regional championships. By far, it's not even close, than any other American player, probably more than 100 individual singles titles throughout the course of his amazing career. And again, in 2008, he's playing Fred, and he is doing, he was coming off a back injury where he had fallen off a ladder and hurt himself. And somehow for that 2008 World Championship, again, Fred had a lot of difficulty in Vegas early on, moving into those middle 2000s. And he loses in 06 to Billy. He loses in 08 to Tony in this incredible, incredible performance. Tony Sprademan has been in every World Championship open singles final since 2012, 10 in a row, with 6 wins during that time. And remember, 2018, Tony Sprademan went unbeaten for a year, won every major championship, didn't even lose a match during that time in singles. That's how great of a player he is in open singles. We talk about the fact, and Mark, I know this is part of your argument, 2012 is the last time we see Fred. Billy Pappas moves on, doesn't really play either during that decade, goes to Europe to play predominantly there, doesn't play much on the American tour starting around 2012, 2013. But still, we can't play that game. We can't say the what ifs. Tony Sprademan's performance, and again, look at the players who did play during that decade. Todd Lafredo still was probably the 3rd best singles player of the 2010s. Robert Mares still capable of winning championships and did win a couple of titles during that decade. Terry Rue, Blake Robertson coming up, Trevor Park, all these players who during that decade would have been going back into the 1980s. These guys would have been considered great, great players, and they are great, great players. So Tony, I think a lot of times we fall into this trap of, because he took his game to such a level of consistency and greatness, that we kind of take it for granted a little bit. Would he have won as many championships with Fred competing and with Billy competing? Who knows, right? But he did. The fact is, he did. He dominated the sport like no one ever has on the American tour for a 10-year period that is still ongoing. His style, the way he plays the game, again, the eye test, watching him play, we've never seen anything like it. As we've watched his style evolve, the 2 to the 5, the tic-tac 5, then he continues to evolve that with 5 row shots and with 2 row shots with the left hand. Might be the greatest singles approach we've ever seen. I mean, right there, I mean, whose singles approach has ever been better? So consistent, so practiced. Number 2 on our top 50. Number 1 here, Tony Sprayman.
Yeah, the reasons why I argue that Tony should be number 1 is because this is about the men's U.S. tour. And so Tony played the men's U.S. tour, and he played it every single year, almost every single event he can get to, probably every event he can get to. And because of that, you got to appreciate and respect that he is the most dominant player on the U.S. tour. I mean, 10 singles finals speaks for itself. When I was saying earlier that we're getting into these weird spaces with this conversation, when we talk about this top 5, Tony is probably the most well-practiced of the top 5. He's probably put the most time in. I think number 2 might be Johnny Horton, maybe. Between Johnny Horton and then the young guys who started at a younger age. But of Tony's own commitment, he will tell you that he's not the most talented player on this list. He's not the most skilled player. He's the most technically, by far, the most technically sound and the most mechanically committed and focused. That's why his level of execution is so high. If Tony's mistakes, when he makes a mistake, is not because the pass flubbed or the shot squibbed. It's because his level of execution is so high that you're going to have to be where he's going to be to block him. So we're talking about the guy that doesn't make technical errors. The technical error is like very, very small with this guy. I don't have any arguments with. I can't argue when you talk about his record that way. It's so difficult. Why you would choose one over the other? But for the purpose of this, we just gotta respect and appreciate where Tony landed in a vote. And I could easily argue all day why Tony could be number 1. The same way I could argue that Fred should be number 1. It's just so even. It's just different, is what it is. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
Well, I think there's 2 things for me why I put him at 1, and I'm just going to put full disclosure, just let everyone know, because I think it's a conversation to be having. I think as game changing as Fred's game was and that style of play that he brought, I still don't think it was accessible to American players. I think that they thought, myself included, at that time when I was looking at games to pattern my game after, I was like, oh yeah, 2 to the 5, that's high percentage, that's good, I like that. But then I'm looking at the Europin and I'm like, I can't do that. There's no way in this world I could ever do that, right? And then a few years later, you see that evolve into Tony's game. And you could go anywhere in the country right now and see generations of foosball players patterning their game after that influence. Yes, it came from Fred's style, but Tony made it something truly, for lack of a better term, American. And it's a phenomenal thing to be that iconic. We talk about iconic in this top 10. That is iconic as you can get when you have all these up-and-coming players that pattern their game. Maybe not entirely like it. Maybe they're going to grow somewhere, do something else with it. I don't know. But that's a beautiful part of this, and that's a beautiful part about where Sprayman is on this list. But let's go another step further, because there's 2 other things that I need to think about here. Again, that thought experiment. Again, I ask myself, you put Tony back in the 70s? Is he going to win with a walking snake on a tournament soccer table? No, I don't think so. But we've seen Tony do what he does on the Warrior tournaments, right? Where he can't shoot a rollover, and he shoots his pull kick. And you know why? That guy can will a black hole out of a paper sack. Like, he just cares. And that's what I'm talking about when we talk about a bookend thing between number 1 on this list and number 5 on this list, Ryan Moore, and we look at the gas factor and how much involvement and what it is that it can do with the ability they do have. Maybe those roles are reversed. And it's a fascinating thing to look at those things in the context of that backdrop and that thought experiment. And finally, for him, at number 1 for Sprayman, I think when I was thinking about him, I was writing some notes last night about him, and I was like, I'm reminded of that analogy of the frog in the pot of water that slowly gets boiled alive as the water starts getting hotter and hotter. The frog doesn't realize what's actually happening to it. We, as fans of foosball, supporters of foosball, are like that frog, and that water slowly getting boiled and turned up higher has been Tony's performance over the last couple decades. I don't know, and we're going to talk about it 10 years from now, 15 years from now, that kind of dominance, whoever it is against, that kind of dominance and persistence that Sprademan has shown and that pathway that he's given to other players that want to play better, that get better. He said, and Mark, you've talked about this, he said, trying my ass off is free. Yeah. And that's huge. That is a huge statement to make. That is wildly important to make for anybody, right? So to conclude with that for Sprademan, I think this level of dominance, what a time we live in. Yeah, there's all kinds of things happening. Foosball is this fluid, evolving thing, et cetera, et cetera. There's always the past. There's the present. There's the future. Obvious, right? But we can, in this moment, take a step back and look at a career that's still in its prime, still moving, and Tony Sprademan and be like, damn, I got to be there for that. Tony Sprademan at number 1.
You're muted, Jim. Jim, you're muted.
Yeah, enjoy it while we have it, folks. Appreciate it. Respect it. It's like Magic Johnson and the teams of the 80s of the Lakers, Frederic Collignon. Enjoy what we have. The interesting thing with Tony, no matter what, gas factor is never an issue with him, right? It's always there. He always gasses. And no matter who he's playing, it's a first round match. It's a second round match. No matter how many events he's playing in a year, he is still each ball, every game, every match, every event, every tournament. He is putting his A game on the table. And that is a rare attribute for any athlete. Look at Michael Jordan, incredible talent. But he also did the work. Kobe Bryant did the work. Magic Johnson did the work. LeBron James does the work, despite the natural abilities and things coming easy to them. And Tony, and I know not the most talented player, but Tony's got some pretty good hand speed. He really does. So there are some natural physical attributes there, but he still puts the work in. He still gasses every single ball. And that is maybe the greatest compliment you can give to anyone. And certainly in my mind, having covered the sport now for 3 decades and been involved with it for, holy cow, 4.5 or so, he is a one of a kind. And I certainly view him as the greatest singles player that I've ever seen.
I think, though, we shouldn't leave out that it's a talent to be as resolved or committed to winning as he is. Mm-hmm. And if you talk to Tony, the reasons, so you have to evolve as a player. And what has evolved with Tony, not just his game, his 5-bar shots, all the nuances of his game, and he'll talk to you about how his game has changed and how he'll do these things he never did before. Like, he'll tell you that if my push shot, if I'm not feeling my push shot, I'll just cheat. No one knows I'm cheating. I'll just move the ball over and cheat. No, I can do 10,000 things. So he's evolved. But I think the other thing, though, when we talk about evolution, the reasons why he won when he was 18 are completely different than the reasons why he's winning now in his 30s. He was driven by different things, and he found a way to reinvent himself or to reconnect with the competitive spirit. You cannot maintain that type of competitive drive over all these years without learning about yourself, because you just burn out. I mean, you just like, I could tell you for myself, things that interested me, things that I got really good at, and then I'm a bored human being and I can't focus, and then it's like just gone. But Tony, to have that kind of winning championship success and that kind of competitive spirit for this long, has had to go through all these different incarnations of Tony, of what's going to drive me now and what drives me now. And it's finally got to a point where, when we heard about it, we talked about Moneyball, the first Moneyball we did, Jim, we had Tony and Tommy with us, and Tony said, now I just, no matter if it's doubles or singles, I just pretend like I got to be the absolute best person on this ball. And I think that's some kind of ceiling for foosball anyway. That's maybe for any sport. That's some kind of ceiling for competitive ascension. Like I got this moment right here, nothing exists but me and the highest level of execution on this possession. That's how Tony can win in spite of not having the lateral speed or the power or the hand size or the length of these guys. He beat these guys anyway. And I'll go back to one last thing. And this is my new favorite thing, Dan Kaiser. It's my new favorite thing because Dan Kaiser just shows you that you don't need all that. You don't need Billy's skill and Ryan's power. You don't need any of that. You just need to have it between your ears. And Tony had all that and the work ethic, and that's why he's number one on this list.
Yeah, I think there's a few guys on this list, real quick, Adam, that we could look at similarly. I think Greg Perry is another guy that the between the ears stuff, and a few others as well. Adam?
Yeah, just real quick. It was 2003, 2004. It was probably Utah State, and I remember seeing Tony up there. I was still like an up-and-coming semi, and he was like Tony at that point, or as close to it as possible at that time. And I go sit up next to him at the bar, and I'm like nervous, and I was like, "Hey, Tony, can I ask your advice?" But I waited 10 minutes before I talked to him. I was getting the courage. I ordered some food. I got a burger and fries, and the food finally came, and that was the icebreaker to me. I said, "Hey, Tony, can I get some advice from you?" And he looks over at me and he goes, "Yeah, sure." Then he says, "Fry sauce." I was like, "What?" He goes, "Fry sauce," and he grabs this, those little plastic things with a crust on it, and he just squirts it all over my fries, and he goes, "Try the fry sauce. It's really good." And I'm like, but he wasn't being like a jerk, right? He's just like, so I ate it, and I've never had fry sauce before. It's a Utah thing. And I was like, "Oh, wow, this is really good." And that was it. That's the story. Number one, Tony Sprademan.
Then you won your next singles matches because you're like, "The hell, fry sauce."
Fry sauce.
Guys, guys all know how much I love this, right? I love the history of the sport as someone who has been around and who has had the privilege of commentating the sport for those 3 decades. I love this stuff, right? And I love keeping it alive. It's like keeping that bouncing ball going, right? And moving forward to whoever picks it up next. That we need to recognize and appreciate the history of the sport and put it into context as best as we can. And it's not easy to go different table styles, different decades, different levels of competition, different monetary factors, certainly from the $1 Million Tour of the 70s to when it dropped off the cliff to the 80s and the Dynamo Tour. And then as Dave Currington and Tornado and Steve Murray and company picked it back up in the late 80s into the 90s. And then where it's been taken since then internationally by Farid Lunis and the ITSF and all those great World Cup and World Championship events. But to be part of something, and as someone who is a sports fan and appreciates the history of baseball immensely and basketball as well, football, I want to make sure that I, for one, and us and we as a team and FoosTalk Live continues to do that. Some of the highlights of the last 2.5 years of doing this show have been speaking with some of those players from the 70s and 80s and the modern day players as well. And to continue to really, really embrace the history of this sport because it's fascinating. Folks, if you haven't seen Foosballers, go watch the movie. That first hour of Foosballers is amazing as far as educating people, the laymen, the non-foosers on the history of the sport. So I appreciate you, Tom, and you, Mark, and you, Adam, and everyone who continues to help perpetuate this goal of appreciating and respecting and acknowledging and documenting the history of the sport.
Can I say that, strictly speaking from just the fans' point of view, which is really the only way I can take this, I'm just dusted off. I would not have wanted to make that choice for number 1 or 2. That would not be within my purview. At any rate, I have to say, one of the things I recognize among all these players is what kind of crucible did they go through to get to where they are? What other players did they have to play against to move up the ladder? And I love the list that Tony gave us in the very end there about all those people he was exposed to from the time he was 12 years of age to more present day. Those really extraordinary names that he rattled off. And would he be Tony without those people?
No.
Yeah, he was naming the biggest bullies in foosball, by the way.
Right.
He was the biggest jerks. They treated him like hell.
No, you're You remember that?
Get out of here, kid! You bother me.
We didn't
That
play
was-
it on the interview, but in that same moment, he called them mean effers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he also said, and this is a really interesting point. He also made a point that a lot of the newer players are thin-skinned, right?
Yeah.
You remember that? But he was
Yeah.
but he's saying that because and I this is the way that I grew up when I was playing. You go get your ass beat in the alley. Like, you don't mess around, right? Like, people were taking it way more seriously than they do now. But I swear, and I think, Mark, isn't it Billy Pappas's fault that everybody's so nice to each other now in foosball? I think it is.
It is Billy's fault.
Great Billy.
He's too nice. No, I struggle with this whole thing, man.
Yeah.
You just know why I struggle with it. It wouldn't be barbaric if people were a little more loose-tongued and comfortable. But it is something. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to get into it. It's really another conversation for another day. It's a
good one to have.
situation where people don't want to be incendiary because everyone's friends, everyone knows each other, and the spectators are the foozers, and they might play with each other one day, or they have a friend who's 1 degree removed, so no one wants to step on each other's toes. And that's just one of the issues with the culture.
The incestuous nature of foosball is its greatest enemy.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. You know what happened, and we can literally trace this back to ground zero. We really can, and there's articles about it in Table Talk magazine in the early 2000s, maybe even the late 1990s. When things happened that homogenized the sport, giving lower ranked players too much money, taking a lot of the edge out of the open events, and I'm not going to place blame on any one person, but there was a change in the way.
As you tunnel vision on one person and funnel in on one person, you say, I'm not going to blame any one person.
But that one person is, there's two sides of the coin there, because there's other things I suppose you could laud as well. But the sport did change, and it isn't. And again, also, if there was the kind of money that there was in the 70s, or even half of that, right? Even if there's big money in the sport, that changes the approach to everything. If the top players are getting paid well, are making a living, are able to do it as their primary source of income, that changes everything. The motivations. Billy's different. Ryan is different. Tony's the same. But it would certainly change things. So we can play the what if game a little bit there for sure.
And I wonder.
I want to go ahead.
Well, just real quick. I'm just curious. Those top 5 players, maybe the top 10. How much of that was money oriented for them, and how much of that was just I want to win oriented for them? And I say that's not a negative comment on them. That's more just us looking back, zooming out and looking at foosball in general. Mark.
It was a little both. The money was a little better, and there was less inflation. That dollar was a little bit bigger. They were paying for maybe 10 to 15 grand overall in money.
But I asked this because Jim brought it up, and I think it's a good conversation. Like, the most money I ever won at a tournament was King of the Hill, which is the 2003 or 4 version of Thunderdome.
Yeah,
which
we're connected right now, because I was going to plug the Ironman Invitational, but something specific. Master wrote me in Facebook Messenger, how are you going to stop the Masters from splitting your tournament? And what that master doesn't remember or fails to understand is one of the reasons why I designed this tournament in 2003 was so you can't split my tournament. And if you've seen the last 2 versions of this tournament, you don't know who's going to win the whole thing until the singles, basically 4th or better. So I told this master, I dare you to try to split my tournament. You're going to have to split it with 20 dudes. You're going to get your money back.
And what did Lewis say to that?
That's funny. It wasn't Lewis. I will say 2 things, though. First of all, I dared this master to try to split my tournament. You cannot split my tournament, because the way the points works, and the way it works with the designated, and it plays to people's weaknesses, you cannot split my tournament. But the second thing is, there are some people who would never split my tournament. And the one person who would never split my tournament is the number 1 person on this list. So you could account for all you want. You could try to do all the finagling you want and talk to each other and whisper. You will fail at that. And not only that, the biggest thing that's going to prevent you from splitting my tournament is the person who's probably the most likely to win it. So work on it. So anyway, that's why I love my format, because it creates a situation where these guys are each other's enemy to the very end.
So Mark, and we've touched on the money, the amount of money. We've touched on the kind of competition, and maybe it's been watered down and homogenized to some degree. The event you're talking about, an Ironman tournament featuring the best players in the world, kind of eliminates those 2 factors, because there's going to be big money, You're not going to be able to split. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to prepare. You're going to have to be versatile. And so I think what you're talking about certainly could remedy many of the issues that we have discussed here with maybe some of the flaws of the sport. So kudos to you. I look forward to when and if that happens. I'd love to be there, by the way.
We're working on it. We're working on it. That calendar, someone's feelings might get hurt because that calendar is really tight. It's an issue right now, but we're actually working on it. So we'll get back to it. I will tell you though, I think I might have mentioned this last time. We had a date. I spoke to, I think, 15 masters. I had 0 no's. I had like 10 hard yeses. I was messaging with Thomas Haas today. I've been messaging with Kevin Huntsdorfer. I've been messaging with 2 great German masters. I'm going to try to get to Atha, of course. There's 2 other guys from the UK. So if I can get 64 of the best players in the world, it's going to be a fun weekend. It's going to be a bananas weekend.
Do we know? We don't know the. You don't have to say the entry fee, but it's going to be big money, right?
Oh yeah,
big.
It'll be the biggest payout, with the exception of maybe the Worlds. If you talk about per capita, if you could compete with 64 people and win the money, it's probably equivalent to the Worlds in money, or maybe even bigger, because there's a variable in there. The Calcutta is a massive variable.
Oh yeah, the Calcutta.
Chance we could get Fred to this.
I'll put Fred. I want to just be transparent with people. I got Fred to help me design the trophy at the very least. I think I put Fred at 5% or less to come. However, I might try to funnel some sponsor funds to pay.
Is it a money
Fred
thing?
a little extra.
Is it a money thing?
No, it's not. Fred, it's not. It's really me being a groveling groupie.
No, what I'm saying is, I'll send him. I'll send whatever he wants. Like I've got all kinds of I want him to come. Why won't he come?
Everybody wants Fred to come.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah, but why not though? Is what I'm asking, Mark. Like,
so it's kind of neat. It's kind of neat that we've discussed the top 25 singles players, kind of look back at history, and now we're kind of talking about something that sort of reinvigorates the vibe of the early years of foosball, in terms of money, in terms of level of competition, in terms of it being an international event, and moving forward. So I love that segue. I know next week we're our, what is it called? Our
postmortem kibbutz.
Our postmortem kibitz. We're going to talk more about the list, but I know week by week we're also going to hear more about the potential for this event happening. I believe it's going to be, it's a reality. It's just a matter of nailing down the date, right?
Yes, it's absolutely a matter of the date at this point.
I want to be there. I like Florida.
Sorry, I'm saying it's just a matter of the date.
The 4 of us down there, wouldn't that be great to do some FoosTalk lives, do some commentary? Oh my goodness, that would be fun.
That would be a hoot and a half.
Media-based Airbnb and go crazy.
It'd be the best of times, because not only would we have some libations, but it'd be the most intense. When you get 64 animals together that are playing for a lot of money, and don't leave this part out. It's race to 10, and one of the mechanics in the qualifying system is points. So every single ball, like 10-7, is a big next to 10-9. Every ball. So when you get 64 of the best players in the world playing every single ball like it's a $10,000 ball, you get some different type of chemistry.
Right.
You get a whole different vibe.
Mark, not only would it be the best of times, but with you there, it'd be the worst of times.
Yes, I guarantee you that.
It's about, yeah. A tale of two cities, for sure.
Yeah. No, but that sounds like that's nearly unprecedented, right? Like the first Ironman that you did in the early 2000s didn't have that depth of field.
No, well, I had 7 of the top 10 at the time, and it was only 32 players. So it was 7 of the top 10 for sure. Billy, Tommy, Tony, Robert Mares, gosh, AZ was there. Trevor Park, but it wasn't this format. It was different. It wasn't the qualifying. It wasn't monster. It was freaky. It was freakish. It was a lot of money. This is going to be a different monster, a different animal. Anyway.
All right, I'm looking forward. I know we discussed some of the differences in opinion that we've had, leading into this. But next week, let's break it down, and we'd love to hear from the viewers as well.
Right.
Let's hear what they think. Let's hear who they think should have been in there, who maybe shouldn't have been in there. Maybe some position changing as well. But I think next week is going to be one of the more interactive shows that we've had in a long time, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. No,
I was just going to say, don't forget to bring your turkey neck, your livers, and your
Take them out of the bag first, though,
Take
before
'em
you
out of the-
cook them.
Yeah.
Making great gravy.
No, I think
They do add great flavor to the gravy, though. They really do.
Oh, yeah.
I think what we'll do is we're going to do, I think, because we did this out to the top 50, was we did a AMA/chat about everything, right? And I think that it'd be good to ask people. I'm going to ask people on the various social media platforms. Do you have any questions, right? To talk about, and also with the Twitch too, with people on there. So I think it's good, and I'm just so excited because people keep talking to me about it, and they're just happy to be hearing the history, getting that context. It's so much
There
fun.
you go. Yeah.
I'll make a top 10 image of the top 10 players in the order, and nothing will start more shit than seeing those top 10 players in that order and hearing people start. Well, the arguments will start. The fire will start immediately.
Do it.
I will do it. I will do
Should
it.
have been higher. Alfredo should have been higher. Furry could have been higher, right? Kaiser apparently Mark should have been top 5.
Jim, who would you have traded Lafredo with in the top 10?
Tough. It's a tough
Let's
one.
talk about that next week.
Yes.
I'll give it some thought.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough, but the numbers, if we're going numbers alone, the numbers suggest he could very well be top 7.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
We'll talk about that next week.
I am anxiously anticipating. Not as much as tonight, though, but I will be anxiously anticipating your kibbutz.
Kiblets. Now we're dog food now. Kiblets. We're going to appreciate your kiblets.
Kibbles and bits.
So, parting shots, Jim. Anything else you'd like to add to?
No. Well, a couple of things that I take away from tonight. Certainly, continuing to educate the players who don't know about the 70s or 80s or 90s and how it all fits together. When I'm doing this, I'm picturing young players. Like Ethan Wynn, Evan McGregor, Nathan Ham. Young up-and-coming players who really want to know about the history of the sport and want to be great players, and you really need to know the history if you're going to be a great player, I think. So as we go through this, as we continue to break down the history and look at it from our particular angles, it makes me feel good to know that the people out there are absorbing this, appreciating it, and hopefully carrying it on into the future.
Mark,
in brief, we all suffer from error bias and era bias, and because the memory is short and fleeting, and people get attached to the things they see and know, and so people will wonder, how could there ever been anything as great as Ryan Moore? That maybe they never saw Billy Pappas, or they'll say, how could anyone ever do anything as good as Tony? And I mean, they just think of everything as black and white that happened, and people were playing with a square ball. But that's not the truth. The truth is, and the analogy once again goes to basketball. Wilt Chamberlain was 7 foot plus, 300 pounds, with a 48-inch vertical. The guy jumped as high as Michael Jordan. Okay, he used to take it easy on people because he didn't want to be seen as a bully. He was the opposite of Shaq. If he was like Shaq, he would have just killed people. And there's a great story about him playing a pickup game with Magic Johnson and the Lakers when he's 43 years old. And they piss him off. They call a goaltend on him, and Wilt gets mad. And Wilt just destroys that Lakers team by himself, blocks everything, scores everything. So, and no one knows about Wilt because he played when it was black and white, and he's like, so he gets lost in the shuffle. Well, people, to your point, Jim, giving context and adding color to these memories that are lost in time, and giving some more definition, it just helps people build on. Hopefully, it helps people build on their foosball games. Hopefully, they know that there's more to it and understand that what they're seeing, there's always more. And if it helps them reach deeper into their foosball pocket and learn more about themselves and the discovery in our conversations, then we've done a lot of things. We've helped preserve the history, we've helped color it, and we've helped young foosers and anyone who's interested know more about the richness of the game. Anyway, that's just all kinds of crazy
Wow,
shit.
that was good, Mark. God, see, when you're on, Mark, dude, my goodness.
I love Mark.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I'm talking
Mark.
about.
Yeah, I know.
amazing.
That's what makes it so good. I'll just my little parting shot is that this has been uncomfortable. Conversations like this are uncomfortable, not between us so much. People that are listening, people that are discussing, the hundreds of people, and there's hundreds of people that are tuning in, listening to this throughout the week on different social media platforms, YouTube, Buzzsprout, Twitch. It's uncomfortable. It puts us in a different place because what it does is it challenges our preconceived notions and the things that we think are right or are not right, right? And that's hard. And I'm going to just draw a straight line between that to what you're talking about, Mark, because honestly, if what we're doing here is trying to get better at foosball, create a community of foosball players, and create a environment that brings in more potential foosball players, we have to look at the things that make us uncomfortable. And we can start in little areas like this that are maybe easy and accessible, top 25, whatever. But as foosball continues, as we try to grow it in this generation, in this technology that exists, we're going to have to get uncomfortable. And that's just all there is to it.
Yeah.
Great point.
Great stuff. Yep.
So, Adam, just for your sake here, I just want to let you know that there's a hot mustard compress waiting with your name on it. Time to dive into that, man. Take care of that. That chest bump you got.
Dive into that, man.
It'll work. I tell you. I swear.
Get well, dude. What he's saying is get well.
Do it.
A little lactose and a little commentation.
Cold medicine does the same thing to me, buddy. So I feel you. Yeah.
Well, it'll be better next week for sure. But in the meantime, thanks so much for tuning in on Twitch TV. And of course, our Patreons, we certainly are so grateful for your support and being with us. But we'll be back again with FoosTalk Live next week.
Foosball tournaments are everywhere. FoosTalk Live proudly presents a weekly update of events near you with the FoosTalk Live Tournament Beat. Time to make your plans with the 2023 Kentucky State Tour kickoff February 1st through the 5th at the Clarion Hotel in Lexington, Kentucky. It's the next 518 Foosball Smashdown Saturday, February 11th at Trick Shots Billiards and Wicked Eatery, Route 9, Clifton Park, New York. The Moneyball Northwest Foosball Tournament happening February 16th through the 19th at the Hyatt Regency in Portland, Oregon. Don't miss the $5,000 DFW Championships of Foosball February 17th through the 19th. Carrollton Chop Shop Sports Garage, Carrollton, Texas. Here comes the $12,000 Georgia State Championships, February 23rd through the 26th at Embassy Suites in Atlanta, Georgia. The Wisconsin State Championships are being held March 16th through the 19th at Mad Apple Billiards, Appleton, Wisconsin. Don't miss the $10,000 Illinois State 10th Annual Foosball Championship, Poplar Creek Bowl, Higgins Road, Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Mark your calendar for the 2023 Hall of Fame Classic at the Golden Nugget in Las Vegas, Nevada, April 12th through the 16th. The Masters Open Championship, April 27th through the 30th at Holiday Inn St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Florida. And who could forget the Tornado Championships, August 30th through the 4th at the Clarion Hotel, Lexington, Kentucky. Each week, we do our best to give you the most up-to-date listing of foosball tournaments near you. If you have an event you would like to add, send us all the details at info@foosballradio.com. Tune in every week for the FoosTalk Live Foosball Tournament Beat. FoosTalk Live is a product of Foosball Radio. With gratitude, we recognize our Foosball Radio Patreons. Our FoosTalk Live sponsor, original-leonhardt-usa.com. And thanks to InsideFoos.com for use of their audio during the show. Tune in again next week for another episode of FoosTalk Live. In the meantime,
we'll see you foozin'.